Sergeant Alexei Volkov had always believed that death in combat would be quick, clean, and probably accompanied by more dignity than his current situation provided. Instead, he found himself pinned behind the twisted wreckage of a human transport, bleeding from 3 different wounds while Karathi plasma fire turned the air around him into a light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't trying to kill him. The Battle of Titan's Edge was supposed to be a strategic withdrawal, a carefully planned retreat that would allow human forces to regroup at more defensible positions. Instead, it had become what military historians would probably classify as a complete disaster with excellent documentation, assuming any historian survived to write about it. Martinez, report. Alexei shouted into his communication device, hoping his squad leader was still alive somewhere in the chaos of burning metal and alien war cries. Static answered him, which was either a technical malfunction or an indication that Martinez had become one with the universe in a more permanent way than military regulations typically allowed. Alexei checked his plasma rifle's charge indicator and discovered he had enough power left for perhaps 6 shots, which would have been adequate for a brief firefight but was somewhat insufficient for the small army of 9-foot-tall crystalline warriors currently converging on his position. The Karathi moved with a fluid grace that suggested they'd been designed by someone with strong opinions about the intersection of lethality and artistic expression. "This is where I make my heroic last stand," he muttered, adjusting his position to get a clearer shot at the approaching aliens. Assuming heroic includes doomed and last stand means spectacular failure. The first Karathi warrior rounded the edge of his cover, its armor gleaming like captured starlight and its weapon humming with enough stored energy to vaporize small buildings. Alexei fired twice, scoring hits that made the alien's shields flare but didn't slow its advance. 5 shots remaining. 3 more warriors appeared, their coordinated movements suggesting they'd had extensive training in the fine art of overwhelming isolated human soldiers. Alexei fired again, managed to drop 1 warrior's shields entirely, then watched 2 more take its place. 3 shots left. The tactical situation, he realized, had progressed beyond challenging directly to mathematically impossible. He was outnumbered approximately 15-1, outgunned by weapons that made his plasma rifle look like a ceremonial dinner fork, and running out of things to hide behind as the Karathi systematically demolished his cover with precise energy blasts. "Well," he said aloud, because talking to himself had gotten him through worse situations and there was no point in abandoning successful strategies now, "this has been educational. I've learned that alien plasma weapons are remarkably efficient, Karathi tactical coordination is annoyingly professional, and I should have listened to my mother about pursuing a career in accounting." He prepared to make his final charge, a glorious but futile assault that would at least ensure he died moving forward rather than cowering behind debris. The Karathi warriors raised their weapons in perfect synchronization, their crystalline faces reflecting the glow of their own deadly technology. That was when she arrived. The Queen's presence preceded her like a change in atmospheric pressure, a shift in the fundamental nature of reality that made every living thing on the battlefield pause in recognition of something larger than themselves. She emerged from the smoke and chaos with the fluid grace of someone who existed partially outside the normal rules of physics, her crystalline armor flowing like liquid light while maintaining the structural integrity of materials that shouldn't exist. Queen Seraphine of the Karathi Empire stood nearly 9 feet tall, her form combining the elegant proportions of classical sculpture with the predatory efficiency of evolution's most successful designs. Her armor appeared to be grown rather than manufactured, each piece forming perfectly curved surfaces that bent light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. But it was her eyes that stopped Alexei's planned heroic charge, violet pools that seemed to contain the accumulated wisdom of civilizations he'd never heard of. The battlefield fell silent except for the crackling of cooling plasma burns and the distant hum of ship engines. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the Queen surveyed the scene of destruction with the detached interest of someone evaluating an art installation. Her gaze found Alexei immediately, focusing on him with an intensity that suggested recognition despite the fact that he was reasonably certain they'd never been introduced. She studied him for what felt like several geological ages but was probably only a few seconds, her expression unreadable behind the elegant curves of her armor's faceplate. "Enough," she said in perfect human standard, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies Alexei's ears weren't designed to detect but somehow heard anyway. The Karathi warriors lowered their weapons immediately, their formation shifting from aggressive assault to respectful attention with the precision of soldiers who'd learned that their queen's orders were not subject to interpretation or delay. Alexei remained frozen behind his inadequate cover, his fingers still on his rifle's trigger while his brain tried to process what was happening. The legendary queen of the Karathi Empire had just arrived at a minor skirmish on a backwater moon and called off the execution of one random human sergeant. It was the kind of event that would require extensive paperwork to explain, assuming he lived long enough to file reports. Queen Seraphine approached his position with movements that suggested she was floating rather than walking, though Alexei's eyes insisted her feet were making contact with the ground at appropriate intervals. She stopped just outside the range of his plasma rifle, close enough to demonstrate she wasn't afraid of him, far enough to show she wasn't entirely reckless. "Sergeant Alexei Volkov," she said, and hearing his name spoken in her resonant voice was somehow more terrifying than facing down her entire army. Human Coalition Forces, 42nd Orbital Infantry, service record including 3 campaigns and commendations for civilian protection during the evacuation of New Geneva. Alexei's rifle nearly slipped from his hands. "How do you know?" "I know many things about you, Sergeant," the Queen interrupted. "More than you might expect, perhaps more than you would find comfortable." She raised one hand, and bioluminescent patterns began flowing across her armor like living circuits made of starlight. The patterns coalesced into a complex sigil that she pressed against the palm of her other hand, creating what appeared to be a glowing tattoo of intricate geometric designs. "You are marked," she announced, holding up her palm so the assembled Karathi warriors could see the sigil clearly. "This human is under royal protection. Any who harm him will answer to me personally." The warriors acknowledged her command with synchronized movements that might have been salutes or religious gestures. Alexei wasn't familiar enough with Karathi culture to distinguish between military and spiritual protocols. Queen Seraphine turned back to him, her violet eyes holding depths that suggested vast intelligence and something else he couldn't identify. "You will be escorted to appropriate quarters. Tonight, when the stars have reached their proper alignment, you will be summoned to my private chambers." "Your chambers?" Alexei managed, his voice cracking slightly on the second word. "A place no human has ever entered," she confirmed. "A sanctum where we will discuss matters that concern the future of both our species." She began to turn away, then paused as if remembering something important. "Oh, and Sergeant, the protection sigil is permanent. Even if you choose to return to human space, you will be recognized as one who has earned royal favor. That is, unprecedented." With that pronouncement, she glided away into the smoke and chaos, leaving Alexei alone with the growing realization that his day had just become significantly more complicated than a simple combat death would have been. 2 Karathi warriors approached his position, their weapons powered down but their presence suggesting that escort was not optional. One of them gestured toward a transport vehicle with movements that managed to be both respectful and unmistakably directive. Right then, Alexei said, shouldering his nearly empty rifle and stepping out from behind his cover. "I suppose we're doing this. Lead the way to whatever counts as prisoner quarters in an alien empire." As he followed his escorts toward the transport, Alexei caught sight of other human prisoners being loaded into detention vehicles. None of them bore the glowing sigil that marked his palm, and none of them were looking at him with anything resembling envy for his special treatment. The transport's interior was designed for beings considerably larger than humans, leaving Alexei feeling like a child in furniture built for adults. Through the transparent walls, he watched the Karathi forces efficiently organizing their victory while human survivors were processed with the methodical care of professionals who'd had extensive practice in managing defeated enemies. "Note to self," he said quietly as the transport lifted off, "when this is over, update emergency contact information to include alien queen who may or may not want to kill me in her private chambers. Mother will want to know where the body ended up." The transport carried him toward whatever destination the queen had in mind, and Alexei found himself wondering if he was being taken to execution, interrogation, or something else entirely that would require skills they definitely hadn't covered in basic training. The Karathi detention facility turned out to be remarkably civilized for a place designed to hold prisoners of war, though Alexei suspected his treatment was somewhat better than standard protocol. His quarters included a bed scaled for human proportions, food that resembled actual cuisine rather than nutritional paste, and entertainment displays that somehow contained human music and literature alongside what he assumed were Karathi cultural offerings. He spent the afternoon trying to make sense of his situation while listening to Bach's Brandenburg concertos. Apparently the Queen's people had excellent taste in classical music, which was either reassuring or deeply unsettling depending on how you felt about enemies who appreciated Johann Sebastian Bach. "This is surreal," he muttered, examining the glowing sigil on his palm that marked him as being under royal protection. The bioluminescent patterns shifted slightly when he moved his hand, responding to muscle tension in ways that suggested the marking was more than decorative. "I'm a prisoner of war listening to Earth's greatest composers while waiting to be summoned to an alien queen's private chambers. There's definitely no protocol manual for this situation." As evening approached, assuming evening had any meaning aboard a space vessel traveling between star systems, a Karathi escort arrived at his quarters. The alien wore ceremonial armor that gleamed with embedded crystals and carried what appeared to be formal court regalia rather than military equipment. "Sergeant Volkov," the escort said in accented but fluent human standard, "Her Majesty Queen Seraphine requests your presence in the royal chambers. You are to accompany me immediately." "Right," Alexei said, standing and smoothing his uniform as much as possible given its current state of combat-related disarray. "Any particular etiquette I should know about?" "Protocol for meeting alien royalty wasn't covered extensively in my military training. Be respectful," the escort advised. "Answer questions honestly. Do not make sudden movements. Her Majesty values directness in conversation." They traveled through corridors that defied Alexei's understanding of ship architecture, passing through sections that seemed to shift between crystalline technology and organic growth patterns. The vessel felt alive in ways that human engineering couldn't achieve, as if the ship itself was a living organism that happened to be capable of interstellar travel. "Question," Alexei said as they walked. "How long has your queen been studying human culture? Because she seems to know more about me personally than my own commanding officers." The escort's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. "Her Majesty has been fascinated by your species for many cycles. She believes humans possess qualities that make them uniquely interesting among the civilizations we have encountered." "Interesting how?" "In a let's study them scientifically way or a these creatures are dangerous way?" "Both, perhaps. You will understand better after speaking with her." They reached a section of the ship that felt different from the military and administrative areas, older, more elegant, with architectural elements that suggested artistic sensibility rather than purely functional design. The doors to the Queen's chambers were works of art themselves, carved from what appeared to be crystallized starlight and inlaid with metals that shifted color as they moved. "Enter," came Queen Seraphine's voice from beyond the doors, and they opened silently at her command. Alexei stepped into a space that challenged every assumption he'd made about alien environments. The Queen's chambers blended Karathi crystalline technology with artifacts that were unmistakably human. Star charts showing Earth's solar system, classical sculptures that looked like museum pieces, and bookshelves containing what appeared to be original manuscripts in multiple human languages. Queen Seraphine stood near a viewing window that showed the stars beyond, her armor replaced by flowing robes that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical. Without the intimidating bulk of her battle gear, she appeared more graceful than imposing, though she still stood nearly 9 feet tall and radiated an aura of controlled power that made the air itself seem to pay attention to her presence. "Sergeant Volkov," she said, turning to face him with those remarkable violet eyes. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "Not sure I had much choice in the matter, Your Majesty," Alexei replied, then caught himself. "I mean, that sounded more disrespectful than intended." "Honesty is preferable to false courtesy," she said, gesturing toward seating areas that had been adapted for human proportions. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. Alexei settled into a chair that was surprisingly comfortable and tried not to stare at the collection of human artifacts surrounding them. May I ask how you acquired all these items? Some of these books look like they're from Earth's classical period. They are, Queen Seraphine confirmed, moving to pour beverages from a service that included both Karathi vessels and what appeared to be human crystal glassware. I have been studying your species for 30 of your years, Sergeant. Your literature, your music, your history, your capacity for both remarkable creativity and devastating destruction. She offered him a glass containing liquid that looked like wine but sparkled with bioluminescent properties. This is safe for human consumption, she assured him. A blend of Karathi ceremonial drink and earth grape varieties we have cultivated aboard the ship. You cultivate earth grapes? In space? Alexei accepted the glass, noting that it tasted remarkably like a good Bordeaux with hints of something that made his tongue tingle pleasantly. Among other things. Tell me, Sergeant, what do you know about why this war began? The question caught him off guard. The official reports say your people attacked human colonies without provocation. Expansion into space that belonged to humanity by right of first discovery. Queen Seraphine's expression shifted in ways that suggested complex emotions. And what do your official reports say about the sacred groves on Kepler 442b? The crystalline formations that had been tended by Karathi gardeners for over 1,000 years before human colonists arrived? Alexei set down his glass carefully. Sacred groves. Burial sites, Sergeant. Memorial gardens where we lay our dead to rest in communion with the crystal matrices that preserve their consciousness for future generations. Your colonists established mining operations directly through our most holy places. We didn't know, Alexei said quietly. First contact protocols are supposed to identify indigenous populations before colonization begins. And they would have, if anyone had asked the right questions. But humans assumed the crystal formations were geological rather than cultural. Your people began strip mining our cemeteries before we could establish communication. She moved to stand near the viewing window again, her silhouette outlined against the stars. I attempted diplomatic contact 7 times over 3 years. Each message was intercepted by your military as potential threats rather than peace overtures. So the attacks were intended as defensive actions to protect sacred sites. But once the first human civilians died, both our peoples became locked into a cycle of retaliation that neither side knew how to stop. Alexei felt something cold settling in his stomach. You're saying this entire war is based on a misunderstanding? Not entirely. There are factions among my people who view humans as inherently aggressive and unworthy of coexistence. Just as there are humans who see Karathi as monsters to be eliminated rather than people to be understood. She turned back to face him, her violet eyes holding depths of sadness that seemed to span centuries. But you, Sergeant Volkov, gave me hope that mutual understanding might still be possible. Me? How? During the evacuation of New Geneva, when Karathi forces were advancing on civilian areas, you remained behind to ensure every family reached the transport ship safely. Our surveillance systems recorded you placing yourself between our warriors and a human child who had fallen during the retreat. Alexei remembered that day, the chaos, the fear, the impossible choice between following orders to retreat and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Any soldier would have done the same. Would they? Queen Seraphine moved closer, her presence somehow both intimidating and comforting. Our analysis suggests otherwise. You chose to show mercy to non-combatants even when facing certain death. That action convinced me that humans possess the moral capacity for peace. Before Alexei could respond, the chamber's doors burst open and several Karathi military officers stormed in, their armor gleaming with battle readiness and their weapons powered for immediate use. Your Majesty, the lead officer announced in the Karathi language, which Alexei's universal translator struggled to process. Human reinforcements approach. We request immediate execution of all prisoners to prevent intelligence leaks. Queen Seraphine's response came in rapid karate that made her escort officers step back as if physically struck. When she switched back to human standard, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. General Thorax, you will lower your weapons in my presence. The human prisoner is under royal protection. Majesty, General Thorax replied in heavily accented standard, this human has seen too much. He knows our ship's layout, our defensive positions. If he returns to his people, he will return carrying a message that could end this war, Queen Seraphine interrupted. Unless you prefer to continue losing, Karathi lives in battles that serve no purpose beyond satisfying your desire for vengeance. The tension in the chamber became thick enough to cut with ceremonial blades. Alexei realized he was witnessing a political struggle within the Karathi Empire, with the Queen's desire for peace opposed by military leaders who preferred the certainty of continued conflict. Sergeant Volkov, Queen Seraphine said without taking her eyes off General Thorax, I am going to make you an offer that will seem impossible. But first, I need to know, do you trust me enough to hear what I have to say? The standoff in Queen Seraphine's chambers had all the warmth and comfort of a diplomatic incident waiting to explode into armed conflict. General Thorax and his officers maintained their aggressive postures while the Queen radiated the kind of calm authority that suggested she'd dealt with military coups before and found them tedious rather than threatening. You want me to trust you, Alexei said carefully, while your general is pointing weapons at both of us and discussing my immediate execution. This is either the beginning of a very unusual peace negotiation or the most elaborate prisoner interrogation in military history. It is an opportunity, Queen Seraphine replied, moving to a control panel that caused holographic displays to materialize throughout the chamber. General Thorax, you will observe but not interfere. What I am about to share with Sergeant Volkov concerns the future of both our species. The holographic displays showed star charts, battle formations, and what appeared to be communication logs between various Karathi and human military commands. Alexei recognized tactical analyses that should have been classified at levels far above his security clearance. For 18 months, the Queen continued, I have been working to establish secret communication channels with moderate leaders in your military hierarchy. The goal is simple. Arrange a ceasefire that allows both sides to negotiate actual peace rather than continue this cycle of retaliation. General Thorax made a sound that Alexei's translator rendered as something between a growl and a protest. Your Majesty speaks of surrender disguised as diplomacy. I speak of survival, Queen Seraphine corrected sharply. Our intelligence indicates that human military production has increased by 300% since this war began. Your people treat this conflict as an existential threat that justifies any level of resource expenditure. She gestured to displays showing human industrial capacity, ship construction rates, and population mobilization statistics. At current escalation rates, this war will consume both civilizations within 5 years. Victory becomes meaningless when achieved over the ashes of everyone you sought to protect. Alexei studied the data, his experience in military logistics allowing him to understand the implications. You're saying we're heading toward mutual extinction. Unless someone takes the first step toward peace, the Queen confirmed. Which brings me to my proposal, Sergeant. I need a human military officer who can serve as my liaison to your command structure. Someone who has seen evidence of Karathi willingness to negotiate and can speak credibly about our intentions. You want me to be your ambassador? Alexei asked, trying to process the magnitude of what she was suggesting. I'm a sergeant. I don't have the authority to negotiate anything more complex than duty rosters. You have something more valuable than authority, Queen Seraphine said. You have moral credibility. Your service record shows consistent choices to protect others even at personal cost. When you speak about honor and duty, people listen. General Thorax stepped forward, his crystalline armor gleaming with agitation. Majesty, this plan requires trusting humans with knowledge of our defensive capabilities, our political structure, our desperation, the Queen interrupted. Because that is what we are, General. Desperate enough to continue killing people who could be allies, desperate enough to sacrifice our future for the satisfaction of revenge. She turned back to Alexei, her violet eyes holding depths of emotion that transcended species barriers. I am not asking you to betray your people, Sergeant. I am asking you to help me save both our peoples from destroying each other. The chamber's communication systems chimed with an incoming priority message. The holographic displays shifted to show tactical updates that made everyone present tense with alarm. Report, General Thorax commanded. General, human reinforcement fleets have arrived in system. Admiral Patterson's task force includes heavy cruisers and assault carriers sufficient for full planetary bombardment. Alexei felt ice form in his stomach. Admiral Patterson was known for aggressive tactics and had little patience for prisoners or negotiations. If his fleet was here, it meant human command had classified this situation as requiring overwhelming force. They're going to demand my immediate return, Alexei said. And if you refuse, Patterson will assume I'm being tortured for intelligence and respond accordingly. Which gives us perhaps 6 hours to establish peaceful contact before Admiral Patterson decides to demonstrate human military superiority, Queen Seraphine said grimly. Unless we can get a peace proposal transmitted to both human and Karathi commands before the shooting starts. General Thorax's armor patterns shifted to configurations that suggested extreme agitation. Majesty, our military council will never approve negotiations while under threat of human attack. They will demand immediate execution of all prisoners and full defensive measures. Then we transmit the proposal without waiting for approval, the Queen said with the calm decisiveness of someone making choices that would define history. Sergeant Volkov, I am offering you a choice that will change your life permanently. She moved to what appeared to be a communications console, her fingers dancing across controls that activated systems throughout the ship. I can transport you back to human lines immediately, with a message requesting peaceful negotiation. You would return as a hero who escaped alien captivity and brought valuable intelligence. Or? Alexei asked, though he suspected he already knew the alternative. Or you help me transmit a joint peace proposal that carries both human and Karathi authorization. It would require you to remain aboard this ship as evidence of human commitment to negotiation, at least until both sides agree to formal talks. Which could take months, Alexei said. Or years, the Queen agreed. And would require you to work closely with me to develop frameworks for coexistence between species that have been trying to kill each other for the past 3 years. General Thorax activated his personal communication system, speaking rapidly in Karathi before turning back to the Queen. Majesty, the military council demands immediate audience. They have received reports of your unconventional approach to prisoner management. Let them come, Queen Seraphine said. But first, Sergeant Volkov must choose. Will you return to your people as a escaped prisoner with intelligence about Karathi capabilities, or will you stay as the first human diplomat to work toward ending this war? Alexei looked around the chamber, at the human artifacts that proved the Queen's long study of his species, at the tactical displays showing 2 fleets preparing for battle, at General Thorax and his officers who clearly viewed him as a threat to be eliminated. Then he looked at Queen Seraphine, whose violet eyes held intelligence, determination, and something that might have been hope. If I stay, he said, what exactly would I be agreeing to do? Help me draft a peace proposal that addresses the legitimate concerns of both sides, she replied. Serve as evidence that humans and Karathi can work together toward common goals. And assist in establishing the first joint diplomatic mission between our species. And if the peace talks fail? Then you would be returned to human space with safe passage and the knowledge that you attempted something unprecedented in galactic history. The ship shuddered as weapon systems activated in response to the approaching human fleet. Somewhere in the distance, alarms began sounding as both sides prepared for what could become the largest space battle of the war. General Thorax, Alexei said, turning to face the Karathi military leader. What happens to your queen if she's seen as too sympathetic to humans? The general's crystalline features shifted in patterns that suggested reluctant respect. She would be removed from command and replaced by leaders more committed to total victory. And then this war continues until one of us is extinct? That is, likely. Alexei looked back at Queen Seraphine, who waited for his decision with the patience of someone who understood that some choices couldn't be rushed. Around them, the ship continued preparing for battle while two fleets maneuvered toward positions that would make diplomacy impossible. Your Majesty, he said formally, I accept your proposal. But I have one condition. Name it. We transmit the peace proposal to both fleets before your military council arrives. If we're going to prevent a battle, we need to do it in the next hour. Queen Seraphine smiled, an expression that transformed her alien features into something beautiful and hopeful. Then we begin immediately, Sergeant. General Thorax, you will assist us in accessing the ship's long-range communications array. Majesty, this is highly irregular. This entire situation is irregular, General. The question is whether we choose irregular diplomacy or regular warfare. The ship shuddered again as external forces began maneuvering for attack positions. Alexei realized he'd just committed himself to either making history or becoming a footnote in the final chapter of two civilizations that couldn't learn to coexist. Right then, he said, moving toward the communication console. Let's see if we can stop a war before breakfast. Working with Queen Seraphine to draft a peace proposal while two hostile fleets prepared for battle turned out to be remarkably similar to defusing a bomb while riding a roller coaster, technically possible, but requiring focus that bordered on the supernatural. The Queen's communication systems allowed them to access diplomatic channels Alexei hadn't known existed, creating a joint message that carried both human military authorization codes and Karathi royal seals. The key, Queen Seraphine explained as her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, is acknowledging that both sides have legitimate grievances while offering concrete steps toward resolution. Right, Alexei said, reviewing the proposal text on his display. So we admit that humans accidentally desecrated Karathi burial sites, acknowledge that Karathi defensive actions escalated into civilian casualties, and propose neutral arbitrators to oversee territorial disputes. Plus immediate ceasefire protocols, prisoner exchanges, and establishment of joint scientific missions to prevent future misunderstandings, Queen Seraphine added, transmitting authentication codes that would verify the proposal's legitimacy to both fleets. The ship's internal communication system crackled with urgent reports from the bridge. Your Majesty, Human Admiral Patterson is demanding immediate surrender and return of prisoners. He has given us 30 minutes to comply before initiating attack protocols. And our military council, the Queen asked. Convening an emergency session. General Thorax reports they are displeased with current diplomatic initiatives. Alexei watched the tactical displays showing both fleets maneuvering into attack formations. How long until the peace proposal reaches both command structures? 12 minutes for transmission, perhaps 20 more for Admiral Patterson to review and consult with his superiors, Queen Seraphine replied. The question is whether he'll hold fire long enough to read it. Patterson's not known for patience, Alexei said grimly. But he's also not stupid. If the proposal carries proper authorization codes, he'll at least pause to verify them with Fleet Command. The chamber doors burst open again, this time admitting a full delegation of Karathi military leaders whose armor configuration suggested they were prepared for immediate combat. General Thorax led the group, his crystalline features set in expressions that transcended species barriers in their obvious anger. Your Majesty, General Thorax announced formally, the military council has voted no confidence in your leadership. You are hereby relieved of command pending investigation of treasonous collaboration with enemy forces. Queen Seraphine straightened to her full impressive height, her violet eyes flashing with authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate. General, you forget yourself. The royal prerogative in matters of war and peace cannot be overruled by military council. Not under normal circumstances, another officer replied. But harboring enemy combatants in royal chambers and transmitting unauthorized communications to hostile fleets constitutes grounds for emergency action. Alexei found himself in the uniquely awkward position of being the subject of an alien coup attempt. If it helps, he offered, I'm technically not an enemy combatant anymore. I accepted diplomatic status as a peace negotiator. Humans do not dictate their own prisoner classification, General Thorax replied coldly. But queens do, Seraphine said with dangerous quietness. And I have granted Sergeant Volkov diplomatic immunity as the first human liaison to the Karathi Empire. The standoff stretched across several heartbeats while tactical displays showed both fleets completing their attack preparations. Alexei realized that in approximately 15 minutes, regardless of their diplomatic efforts, Admiral Patterson would likely begin bombardment protocols that would make peace negotiations permanently impossible. Your Majesty, he said carefully, there might be a way to resolve this that satisfies everyone's immediate concerns. All eyes turned to him, which was roughly as comfortable as being studied by a panel of judges who were considering whether to award him a medal or execute him for treason. The peace proposal has been transmitted, he continued. Both fleets will receive it within the next few minutes. If Admiral Patterson responds positively, the military council's concerns about unauthorized negotiation become moot, the talks will have human fleet authorization. And if Admiral Patterson responds negatively? General Thorax asked. Then you resume command, I become a regular prisoner again, and everyone can get back to trying to kill each other with clear consciences. Queen Seraphine looked at him with an expression that suggested she was reassessing his tactical intelligence. You're proposing we wait for human response before resolving our internal political crisis. I'm proposing we let the success or failure of our diplomatic initiative determine who was right about the possibility of peace, Alexei said. It's a practical test of competing theories. The ship shuddered as its defensive systems powered up in response to Admiral Patterson's fleet taking aggressive positions. On the tactical displays, Alexei could see human battle cruisers arranging themselves for optimal bombardment patterns while Karathi vessels prepared defensive screens. Incoming transmission, the bridge reported. Admiral Patterson is requesting direct communication with Karathi Command Authority. Put him through, General Thorax commanded, then paused and looked at Queen Seraphine. With your Majesty's permission. Granted, she replied, activating the main communication display. Admiral Patterson's weathered face appeared in holographic projection, his expression carrying the controlled aggression of someone prepared to order the destruction of several city-sized spaceships. This is Admiral Patterson, commanding Task Force Vengeance. I am speaking to whoever leads the alien force currently holding Sergeant Volkov prisoner. I am Queen Seraphine of the Karathi Empire, she replied with formal dignity. Sergeant Volkov is not a prisoner but a diplomatic liaison working to establish peaceful communication between our peoples. That's an interesting interpretation, Patterson said dryly. I've received what appears to be a joint peace proposal carrying his authorization codes. Either he transmitted it voluntarily or you've broken human encryption better than anyone thought possible. Alexei stepped into view of the communication pickup. Admiral, the proposal is legitimate. I'm working with Queen Seraphine to establish negotiation frameworks that could end this war. Patterson studied him for several seconds, his experienced eyes clearly evaluating Alexei's condition and demeanor for signs of coercion. Sergeant, are you speaking under duress? No, sir. I'm speaking as someone who's learned that this entire conflict is based on misunderstandings that could be resolved through negotiation rather than continued warfare. The peace proposal mentions Karathi sacred sites that were allegedly disrupted by human colonization, Patterson said. You're saying these aliens have legitimate grievances? I'm saying both sides have legitimate grievances and the intelligence to work out solutions that don't require anyone else dying, Alexei replied. Admiral Patterson was quiet for nearly 30 seconds, clearly weighing options that would affect the lives of thousands of people in both fleets. Around him, Alexei could see the Karathi Military Council waiting for human response with the tension of people whose political futures depended on the outcome of the next few minutes. Queen Seraphine, Patterson said finally, I'm prepared to order a temporary ceasefire to allow formal review of your peace proposal. But I'll need guarantees regarding Sergeant Volkov's safety and freedom of movement. Granted, the Queen replied immediately. He will remain aboard my vessel as a diplomatic representative, with full access to communication with human authorities and the right to return to your fleet at any time. And I'll need evidence that you have the authority to negotiate on behalf of your people. General Thorax stepped forward, his armor gleaming with formal military insignia. Admiral Patterson, I am General Thorax, Senior Military Commander of Karathi forces in this sector. While I disagree with Her Majesty's diplomatic approach, she retains full royal authority to negotiate peace terms. Patterson nodded slowly. Very well. I'm ordering my fleet to defensive positions and establishing a communication link for formal negotiations. But understand, any hostile action will result in immediate resumption of attack protocols. The communication ended, leaving the chamber in silence except for the background hum of ship systems powering down from combat readiness to normal operations. Well, Queen Seraphine said, turning to face the military council, it appears our diplomatic initiative has succeeded in preventing immediate battle. Perhaps the council would like to reconsider their vote of no confidence. General Thorax's crystalline features shifted in patterns that Alexei was learning to recognize as reluctant respect. Your Majesty's unconventional methods have produced unexpected results. The military council withdraws its challenge to your authority. Wise decision, the Queen replied graciously. Now, Sergeant Volkov and I have considerable work ahead of us if we're to transform a temporary ceasefire into lasting peace. 3 months later, Alexei stood in the observation deck of Neutral Station Harmony, watching human and Karathi vessels docking side by side for the first joint scientific expedition to catalog and protect Karathi sacred sites throughout contested space. The peace negotiations had been complex, sometimes frustrating, but ultimately successful in creating frameworks for coexistence that both species could accept. Any regrets? Queen Seraphine asked, joining him at the viewing window. She wore diplomatic robes that blended human and Karathi design elements, a visible symbol of the cultural exchange that had grown from their initial wartime meeting. About leaving military service to become an interspecies diplomat? Alexei considered the question while watching human children and young Karathi interact in the station's cultural exchange areas. No. Though I never imagined my career would involve learning to speak 3 Karathi dialects and mediating disputes over crystalline gardening techniques. Your mother was quite surprised when you introduced me, Seraphine observed with amusement. I believe her exact words were, well, he always did bring home strays, but this is ridiculous. She likes you, Alexei assured her. She's just adjusting to the idea that her son is in a relationship with someone who could literally pick him up and carry him around like luggage. I would never do such a thing, the Queen said with mock seriousness. It would be undignified for someone of my position to carry luggage. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the activities of a space station that represented hope for 2 species learning to understand each other. Their relationship had evolved slowly from diplomatic necessity to genuine partnership to something deeper that neither had expected but both treasured. Seraphine, Alexei said quietly, what do you think would have happened if you hadn't spared my life on Titan's edge? The war would have continued, she replied simply. Both our peoples would have lost more lives fighting over misunderstandings that no one bothered to clarify. And I would never have learned that humans possess the capacity for wisdom as well as courage. And I would never have learned that alien queens can be brilliant, compassionate, and surprisingly good at human chess, Alexei added. I still say your chess rules are unnecessarily complicated, Seraphine protested. Karathi strategic games are much more elegant. Which is why we're developing new games that combine both traditions, Alexei pointed out. Along with art forms, musical collaborations, and scientific research programs that neither species could have achieved alone. In the distance, the first human Karathi joint research vessel was preparing for departure to study quantum crystalline formations in the Andromeda galaxy, a mission that would have been impossible during the war but now represented the future both species were building together. Queen Seraphine took his hand, her touch still carrying the slight bioelectric tingle that had marked their first connection. You know, Sergeant Volkov, when I decided to spare a human soldier's life, I never imagined it would lead to this. What? Interspecies peace, cultural exchange, and a space station dedicated to cooperative research. No, she said, squeezing his hand gently. I never imagined it would lead to falling in love with the most stubbornly idealistic human in the galaxy. Alexei smiled, watching their reflections in the observation window. A human and a Karathi standing together against the backdrop of stars that no longer separated their peoples but united them in shared exploration of infinite possibilities. Well, he said, I never imagined that getting captured by alien forces would be the best thing that ever happened to me. But here we are, proving that the universe has a sense of humor about bringing people together. Outside the window, human and Karathi vessels continued their work of building a future neither species could have imagined alone, while two individuals who had once been enemies discovered that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating others but from learning to understand them.